Morning again, folks. We're now at 10 o'clock. We appreciate you being here. Just watching the attendees list myself, and we'll just give another minute for folks to be able to file in on this Good Friday morning, and appreciate you being with us. So we're about a minute past the hour here this morning in the Eastern time zone, and really grateful that folks are come to join us. I see there's still some folks coming in, but for sake of time, we want to get started here today. I'm Jared Abdurkin. I'm the Director for State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements at the New England Board of Higher Education, and we'll explain all a little bit more about what that means. We're thrilled that you've decided to join us here today for a webinar focused on the U.S. Department of Education and professional licensure updates in particular. And really happy to have folks out there who've decided to join us. Like I said, I'm Jared Abdurkin. I'm the director for the New England Board of Higher Education, and specifically for state authorization reciprocity agreements. And we'll dive a little more into those two pieces. So I'll cover some of the agenda items here for today and kind of do some housekeeping as well. So we encourage folks, you'll see the question and answer feature is enabled today. Please do use that for questions. We don't have the chat enabled other than for our panelists to send one-way information to you folks, but do use that question and answer specifically for a Q&A, and do put those in as the webinar goes along. We should have about at least the last 20 minutes or so to take questions. So we'll be monitoring that, and then I'll be posing some of those questions to our panelists here live towards the end of the session here. We'll also do the best we can after the webinar, especially around professional licensure-based questions. Anything we can't get to, we're going to seek to try to answer in writing afterwards and share that with you folks. So look out for that afterwards as well. Closed caption feature is available today, and I can see some folks have selected that, so that is available for you too. We also want to reiterate that the webinar is being recorded, and that the presentation slides from the two presenting groups that you'll see today are going to be made available as, like I said, again, are going to be written answers to Q&A specifically around professional licensure that we may not have been able to get to in the session today. So the recording, presentation slides, and that written Q&A will be shared back with everybody who registered in email, hopefully within the next week or so. Again, we're happy to have you share this out, and we know folks obviously are joining us live, but may also have registered simply to receive the materials after, and that's certainly fine, and we're glad that you did. So a couple of things to kind of table set for us today. I'll be pretty brief, and we're really getting to get into the meat of the presentation from our expert panelists here today. And the purpose, I think, is, folks can likely at least generally understand is to get a at least general understanding of recent regulations that the U.S. Department of Education put out in October of last year that have a variety of impacts and considerations, as well as the current what's called negotiated rulemaking, in which the U.S. Department of Education is looking at potentially adding some additional regulatory language that could go into effect in the not too distant future, all of which has general impact and consideration for institutions, certainly in our region and beyond. And I'll share too today. We are, again, the New England Board of Higher Education. We used as an invitation list institutions that participate in SARA, State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements. And again, I'll go into a little bit of what NEBHE is and what SARA is before we get to our presenters, but that's where you folks were invited. And specifically for SARA purposes, New York and New Jersey align with the NEBHE compact to be able to participate, have their institutions participate in SARA. So even though we're the New England Board of Higher Education, folks in New York and New Jersey, we're glad you're here. And this information, again, is broadly impactful impactful and of interest to institutions in our region and beyond. So just to clarify that, and again, happy that folks are here today. So we've got two then expert organization presenters, the State Authorization Network, or SAN, as well as the Higher Education Licensure Pros, who we'll introduce in a little bit. They're going to do about half an hour each after I've finished successively there. And then, like I said, we'll get into Q&A. So we've got until 11:30 Eastern time today that you'll hear presentations, especially from SAN and HELP, and then we'll get into some questions and answers. So again, feel free to be putting that Q&A in as we move along. So quickly, I just wanted to highlight what the New England Board of Higher Education is. Folks may certainly be aware of some of the work we do, like State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, or SARA, but this seems like a nice opportunity to explain why it is that we've taken the time to gather you here. So NEBHE is one of 4 higher education regional compacts in the U.S. We were founded in 1955 by agreement of the New England state governors at the time, and then were subsequently approved by the respective legislatures. And then we're also authorized by U.S. Congress. So that is kind of our foundation and our mandate, if you will, for operating and serving higher education issues, especially in New England, and again, uniquely for SARA for New York and New Jersey. Our mission, as you see on the screen, to advance equitable outcomes through convening research and programs for students, institution leaders, and policymakers. And folks may, again, be aware, especially in New England, of some of our signature programs, discounting tuition and tuition break with an agreement between New England states. Our recent efforts around education behind bars, or prison education, as I know folks are quite familiar with. Something called our North Star Collective, focused on BIPOC faculty and creating community for those folks. The Connecticut Tech Talent Accelerator, working on technology and connections with workforce and post-secondary education, in that case, specifically in the state of Connecticut. Open education resources, which folks, again, are aware and is kind of a hot topic around resources that students have access to in their campus. A transfer guarantee program, working on a transfer between 2-year and 4-year institutions in the New England region. And again, State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, or SARA, that I'll talk a little bit more about. So those are just some of the things we do, but this is especially how we kind of impact or involve in New England especially, and encourage folks, take a look out, for things that we do and how we help and support. And this is why we bring you all together today. And again, even while we used State Authorization Reciprocity Agreements, or SARA, which likely many of you participate in as the basis to send invitations, because this information is broadly impactful, whether or not you participate in SARA, we use that as a kind of a resource. And that's especially because we have relatively high participation rate in New England, New York, and New Jersey for SARA. So quickly on SARA, and again, folks may be familiar, but if you're not, is a voluntary agreement that encompasses 49 member states and 3 territories. Nearly the entirety of the United States are members, and that allows then institutions in the participating states to participate in SARA. And that's essentially to streamline regulations around distance education. So you, as an institution in any of the member states, can enroll and engage students in, again, nearly the rest of the U.S. Allows essentially a consistency around distance education in delivering that across state borders with consistent and less complicated and less expensive regulatory processes. It saves institutions collectively millions of dollars across the country on an annual basis. And really, primarily, the focus, of course, helping to provide access and opportunity to high-quality online programs for students that may not be available otherwise, and of course allows you as institutions to operate as such. So there are 4 regional compacts in the country, NEBHE being one, of course, focused in the Northeast, one that generally encompasses the Midwest, the South, and the West. That organizes the states and is a kind of a conduit to this agreement with a national coordinating body called NC-SARA that was created to help arrange the agreement nationwide. So that's a bit of a background on SARA, and again, likely something most of you all as institutions participate in. So again, really excited to have you today. Share quickly too, in New England and New York and New Jersey, we have over 360 institutions that participate in SARA. There continues to be some growth there too, and we're really, again, excited that folks who are in any level of distance education across state borders find SARA to be a great opportunity for their institution to participate in. Recent data showed nearly 500,000 students were enrolled exclusively online at institutions in our region. Again, that's New England, New York, and New Jersey, of those who participate in SARA. And about half of those students, while some were in their home state and exclusively in distance education in your institutions, some were, again, about half were coming from out of state and out of the region. And that is an interesting mark for New England specifically, in New York and New Jersey, is there's a fair amount of folks who are pursuing exclusive distance education entirely from outside of our region. So certainly, again, very strong quality and exciting programs that your institutions offer that folks choose to come and enroll at a distance. And last point we share, nearly 33 million was saved collectively by SARA institutions in our region on state authorization renewal costs. So it was quite pricey in years past to operate in multiple states if you were going to enroll students at a distance in multiple states. And this certainly is a great savings to institutions, especially for what the cost to participate in SARA is in through your state potentially and through NC SARA itself. So I wanted to share a couple of highlights and kind of table set where we are and who we are as well. So I'm really excited now at this point to introduce the executive director for the WICHE Cooperative for Educational Technologies, WCET. And again, WICHE is our sister compact in the Western region, and is also the Vice President of Technology and Enhanced Education for WICHE, and that's Russ Poulin. So I'm again excited to introduce the state authorization, and he's speaking today on behalf of the State Authorization Network to talk about some issues here, and then we'll turn it over to the Higher Education Licensure Pros. So each of the groups will take about half an hour. Again, put your Q&A in the chat, in the question and answer section as we move forward, and we'll look forward to answering that towards the end. So I'm going to stop sharing to allow my colleagues at WCET SAN to share, and encourage then Russ to take it away, and he'll introduce his team as well. Thanks so much, Russ.
Excellent, Jared. Thank you for having us here today, and thank you, everyone in the NEBHE region. Catherine, if we could move on to the next slide. And so what we're going to talk about here today is, again, what is going on in the federal government right now, and we're going to have a particular focus on what's going on with this negotiated rulemaking that we have here. And also want to introduce you to the State Authorization Network and some of the opportunities that you have through that. Let's go to the next slide. So I'm Russ Poulin, as was said, Executive Director of WCT, the WICHE Cooperative for Educational Technologies. While we're based in WICHE, we are an organization that has members from all 50 states. It's mostly institutions and other sorts of organizations focused on distance and digital learning. And we look at the policy and practice of that. A couple things about me. I was born in Manchester, New Hampshire, so I have a soft spot in my heart for the NEBHE region, and we visit there and we'll vacation in New Hampshire, Maine, and the NEBHE region at times. Another thing that we'll talk about the negotiated rulemaking. I've served on negotiated rulemaking. You can pity me now, and so we'll talk a bit about that and can answer questions about that. And then also I'm sitting in for Cheryl Dowd, and she has these slides. And I think she gave me about 3 hours worth of content that I have 20 minutes to do. So I apologize for talking fast. I'm going to go through part of it very, very quickly, and then try to slow down when we get to the part about the rulemaking and get that. But she wanted to provide you with all sorts of resources. So you will be getting this presentation, and you'll have all sorts of links and resources that you'll have in there. So with that, thank you. Welcome. Let's move to the next slide, Catherine. With that, one of the things she wanted to remind you about that we've had this looming government shutdown. The federal government is funded from October 1st to September 30th. We're now approaching almost 6 months into this fiscal year, and they've averted shutdowns by temporary measures right now. And the next deadlines are coming up in March, and given what's been happening, if you've been following that, hard to see that they'll make those deadlines, and so we could have it shut down coming again, and that could have an impact on all sorts of things, including the rulemaking coming up. Because they're supposed to end the rulemaking by March 7th, but they won't be able to. They shut down for a while. They won't be able to work on those rules after that. Let's move to the next slide. And let's see, and so some new regulations that did come out of rulemaking, just a word about what is this negotiated rulemaking thing? That what it is that Congress has laws and that they have the laws, but they're not always specific, and that's thankfully so, down to exactly how, whether it's the Department of Education or Veterans Administration or Department of Justice, whoever, exactly how they are to implement these things. And so the department will go through a rulemaking where it comes up with these rules. They involve people, what they call constituents, people who are affected by the rules, to sit and then discuss what is being proposed by the department, and then they try to come to consensus on that. What comes out of the rulemaking, the department will put out for the public to comment on, and then they'll respond to those comments and then put out the final rules. And that process usually takes a good year, if not year and a half, sometimes depending on the years. But there's some rules came out last year about financial transparency and gainful employment. Please do not ask me about that. We'll give you some resources on that. You can ask me about the other things, and then also on this thing about certification procedures was the one that came out on Halloween. We'll make no jokes about Halloween and the rules coming out, but certification procedures was one that was one that got into some of the different things that we're going to talk about today. So let's move on to the next one. And then what certification procedures are is that it's essentially a contract between the institution and the Department of Education about, here are specific things that you're going to do in order to remain eligible. It still sort of baffles me why they need that, but it is a very specific thing that they do. And so there were some changes in terms of the expectations in that contract, in that certification procedures thing that does have to be signed by the president or somebody at the institution. So let's move on to the next slide. Again, I told you I was going to go fast through these first ones, but you'll have all these for resources. One of the ones that are on here is that is looking at programs leading to license. And so I'm going to go briefly through this one because Chris is really going to cover this far more in depth here. But just wanted to know, as part of that certification procedure, that they really raised the bar, going from just what was or currently is notifications to beginning July 1st of this year. It'll be that you'll have to have much more of an assurance that if you're offering a nursing program in New Jersey, let's say, or Delaware or Nevada or wherever it is, that you meet the requirements for that license. And Chris will talk more about that. So that's a big one that came out of that. Let's move to the next slide. And the other one that came out of that, state laws related to closure, and you had to show that you meet those particular laws in terms of closure. We believe that reciprocity fulfills that requirement. We've had others who've interpreted it differently, but we've not seen anything from the Department of Ed that says otherwise. And this may all change with the current rulemaking that's going on. So with that, let's move on. These are resource slides about the things that we were just talking about. And so there's links to all sorts of things that are out there. Let's move to the next one where we have some more resources. We don't cover value transparency or gainful employment very much, but that's something where you can find out more about that we do want to make sure that you know where to go to for those issues. Okay, Catherine, let's go on to the next one. U.S. Department of Education rulemakings that they had yet another one on student loan debt relief. Again, don't ask me about that one. That gets into a whole lot of things about financial aid and student loan. We don't get, but the one that's going on now is this institutional quality and accountability one that is looking at several issues. It actually started the first week of January. Just this week, that was the first week of negotiations. The second week of negotiations was this week. So several of us are a little bleary-eyed from watching that go on this week. And then the last week is March. And then so by March 7th, they're planning to have final votes in terms of the rules that come out of that. And then if they come to complete agreement on those rules, they go ahead with those. If they do not come to complete agreement, or consensus is the word that they use, if they do not come to complete an agreement on that, then the department gets to decide. And we'll get through, there's loads of issues that they're working on, but we'll look at some around state authorization, distance ed, and financial return to Title IV in these, because these will have a real impact on you. So I did want to make sure that we get, I'll slow down, we'll move to the next slide, and then I'll slow down a little bit here and try to get to these issues. Do ask questions about these. I don't know if I have all the answers. I can give you my perspectives of what I've seen going on and what it might mean, but we do want you to know there's huge things that are going to have a big impact on institutions coming out of this rulemaking, and depending on where it goes, I think at least some of them. Well, I think it's going to change everything we do in a lot of things that we do in distance education or digital learning. Going to be I can't emphasize enough that there's a huge impact on these things, and want you to see this and not be surprised, and that there are some opportunities for you to get involved at this point. So the first one, reciprocity. I know that that's a big thing. Let's move to the next slide and talk about that and see, well, what the heck are they doing there? So one of the things that they're talking about is that, as you know right now, that if you join reciprocity, if states join reciprocity, but if you're an institution that participates in reciprocity, that what happens is that you are not subject to the education-specific regulations in another state. So what's that sort of things? Well, examples there is that, let's say that they have there's some things there, bonding or tuition recovery funds, or some states had things around faculty credentials, or faculty being in your state, or marketing in the state, or just a whole bunch of different regulations in the state. And a lot of them around for-profit institutions, especially. Well, what is being proposed by some of the negotiators is that it would be up to the state whether, even if you're in reciprocity, if they wanted you to pay a bond, that they could still have institutions do that. So, or if they had requirements about faculty, that they could still have that requirement on you, and that they could decide for the institutions in that. So, you probably are figuring out the concern that we have there on the right is that, okay, this now starts taking away the idea of reciprocity, is that you have, the idea that you know what you're going to do in each state. Where now, if this were to go through, again, these are all proposed, if this were to go through, that you would you would have to figure out, how is there something different in Massachusetts? Is there something different in Texas? Is there something different in Ohio? Is there something different in all these different states? And what do I have to do about it? And do I want to pay that bond in Ohio that I need to pay, and all that? So that's something that you'll need to figure out. While we do believe it'll improve student protections in a few states, that it'll eliminate most of the benefits of reciprocity. And the thing is, too, is that some state regulators will have a lot bigger workload, because now they're starting to answer a lot of questions from all the institutions about, well, what do we have to do in your state? And so there'll be that impact as well. The second issue that we have down there is about the boards that sort of oversee reciprocity, and we think that this would be both, in the SARA purpose, it would be both the board that oversees SARA, but could also be the regional steering committees that play a huge part in SARA. That it would be limited to, right now it says limited to state employees and regulatory jobs. So either like the state regulators or the AGs of the states. And so our concerns about things like the regional compacts who are organizing these, or others with expertise, or we sort of believe that institutions are paying for this. Shouldn't they have like one seat on a board maybe, or accreditors? There's others that they would be left out. And so again, these are proposed. One more on reciprocity. Let's move to the next slide. That's some other things that we see there. That there are, this is on complaint processes. And there's a lot of, and some of these make a lot of sense where they want to have report on the types of complaints, like were they complaining about misrepresentation? Were they complaining about what the institution did to them? Were they, what was the type of complaint, so we can provide better consumer protection? And then the other thing that they're looking at is that maybe allowing the student to complain to their state rather than the state where the institution is. And we do have some concerns about exactly how that would work and in what jurisdiction the other state has and how they would work together on that. And so we're working on some options on that. Again, put questions in, and then we'll talk about this more if you wish when we get to the end. Let's move to something completely different that's in here on distance education issues that they're working on. Let's move to the next slide. On this one, kind of an interesting one is that there are three types of locations that are defined by the Department of Education. One is the main campus. Second is a branch campus, which is when they have a little bit of autonomy, but they're clearly tied to the main campus, but it's a branch campus. And the other one is an additional location. Get that? An additional location is more that, well, you're going to a mall or a school or a church, or you rent a few rooms in downtown someplace, and that you have courses that you offer there where it's not really independent, but it's a place where you're offering services. Well, and that's called an additional location is the official term for that. They want to make a form of additional location called a virtual location. Now, I love the whole nomenclature around that. Virtual location. It's kind of fun. Anyway, but so any program that an institution has where it's 100% at a distance, with the exception of some residential periods, as you see there, you would put into this virtual location. There'd be one really big benefit if your institution decided that you wanted to close down all those distance ed programs, that would allow the students in those programs to get to advantage themselves of some federal financial aid closure rules that are out there. That sounds good. That helps students. You have that. The other is that they want to be able to do more data tracking. Is that this will allow them to track data about outcomes. We're sort of unclear about how they're going to do that, and we're kind of worried that they haven't done a good job with that data so far. I can say a lot more about that, but we've argued for more data for years about distance education, and so that is something that we now have to enter. If they do this, then we have to enter a thing about educating them about, oh yeah, distance ed or adult students are different than 18 to 20-year-olds who are at the University of Rhode Island, than the adults or whoever that you're serving at a distance. So that's another thing. This might be a big one. I'd love to hear feedback from you on this one. This is just for institutions that use the clock hour financial aid model. Most institutions use just the credit hour, that you offer your courses in credit hours. You count up the credit hours. That's how much financial aid a student has. Mostly it's either entire institutions or parts of institutions that have sort of practical or career programs, that they go to this clock hour, that they say, okay, student has to spend 38 hours a week fixing motors or doing massage or doing something, and that's usually face-to-face. But there are some asynchronous programs, because if you think of a lot of IT programs, we had a testimony from a cosmetology program that was doing that with the things about how to do coloring or how to do the science of it and all that didn't need to be in person. But they want to get rid of the asynchronous courses in distance ed for those clock hour programs. Again, note that is not for credit hour, and I know people get freaked out when they hear that. But in those, if there are any of those programs out there, I really want to hear from you because it looks like they're moving forward with that. But I'm starting to hear that some programs have said, "Oh, wait, what are they doing?" and that they're speaking up now. So I do worry about that they're kind of jumped the gun and that they've had problems with compliance, so they're going to ban the whole thing. I don't think that's really the way to go. Let's move to the next one, and then let's move to the next slide. Return to Title IV is a thing. If you're talking to your financial aid friends and you do R2T4, then you can sound like you're a knowledgeable financial aid person. This is for students who drop out, that there's so much money that needs to be refunded to the Department of Education in terms of the financial aid that is remaining and what needs to be done. But how do you calculate that if a student drops out or a student withdraws and doesn't tell you that they're going to do that? Okay, when was the last time you do it? And right now we use something called last day of attendance. We go back and find what was the last bit of academic engagement, that they took a test, that they submitted a paper, that they did an academic discussion. There's several other sorts of things that they could do. When would they do that? Well, they feel that institutions haven't done a good enough job on that. And so what they want to require is that for all distance education courses, you'd be required to take attendance. Okay. Let's see. So we're kind of wondering about that one. And then attendance, we think, means tracking the same sorts of things in terms of academic engagement. If you just show up and log in, that doesn't count, is what they're saying. We need a lot more clarity on this. It seems like it's a lot more work to get to the same point to me. I'm surprised people haven't been pushing back on it more. And then the other part of it is that after 14 days that the student would have to be dropped, and we can talk more about that. I'm coming to the end of my part of this, so let's move on to the next things. How to follow these things. There's all sorts of resources. I'll put some things in while the others are talking, some links in there, but you have these links here as well. Let's move to the next slide. Get that. How do you participate in this? And we can say some more about that later, that if you want, they do have public testimony, and they only have like only a few slots that they can get in, like 9 or 10 slots in a half hour for 3 minutes that you can testify. But I can also put things in there where you could contact the negotiators if you want. You'd have to find their emails. And then let's go on to the next slide. And with that, okay, I got through 3 hours of stuff in 21 minutes. You have to let Cheryl know that I did that. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to State Authorization Network, is something I founded and is part of WCET. I'm going to turn over to our friends Catherine and Jana to talk about SAN. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Russ, for that. Very comprehensive overview. Good morning, everyone. I'm Jana Walster-Smith. I'm the Director for Interstate Compliance and Member Outreach here at SAN. And for those who may be less familiar with what we do, I just want to provide just a brief overview of who we are and, again, what we do. To start off, SAN is a member organization, and we exist to simply empower our members. We facilitate sharing and collaboration. We help to provide research as it relates to regulatory challenges. And all of this is really rooted in student protections and really student success. We provide analysis. We provide resources, training. We'll talk a little bit more about training in the next couple of minutes. We, again, just exist to provide solutions for a lot of these regulatory challenges. Russ spoke to the rulemaking process and how we are heavily involved in monitoring those processes. Next slide, please, Catherine. Again, what we do is provide valuable resources. And we do that. We're able to do that because we, have lots of opportunities for members to, collaborate and share. For example, we have an advisory group. It's a panel of member institutions that help us determine what needs to be looked at or what institutions are really interested in. Special interest teams, we provide talking points and white papers, webinars, podcasts. We do research. One of the research projects that we completed recently, one for which I'm very proud because I was on the project, is we polled. The project was called Profile of a State Authorization Professional. It was based on a study that was done several years ago in collaboration with WGU, Western Governors University, and the SAN team. So we kind of updated that research. And what we did was look at the people who do this work. We talked about, salaries. We inquired about, how many people are in your group? Who does the work? Give us a list of some of your duties. And lots of interesting information unfolded from that research process. We had a member recently to say, hey, I used that research to let my leadership know I'm in need of another person. Let's look at what we do and look at what we need. And she was able to get another FTE. But anyway, again, we provide lots of opportunities for those types of collaborations. My colleague, Catherine Kerensky, for whom you'll meet in just a second, every second Tuesday of the month does an open forum. And it's just a general talk. There's a specific topic every month, but again, she brings in an expert and, we'll speak to whatever that topic is. Very informal, but also meant to foster collaboration. I also do a monthly coordinator call for which, members seem to be really appreciative of. And each month we bring in member institutions or we bring in experts to talk about some aspect of the work that we do. We provide updates and just general guidance on federal regulations, how to deal with military students and professional licensure. And we'll hit that in just a second. Next slide, please, Catherine. All right, so again, some of the key resources that we provide. If you go to the SAN page, there's lots of information out there that's available for non-members, but there are also some member only content. But we have a getting started page that gives you information on foundational principles, key rules, that kind of thing. There are SAN essentials, they have SAN tables. Again, lots of information for those who may be new to the profession or those who may need a refresher. Again, one of the things, if we go to the SAN papers, we've got beginner's checklist. This just, again, gives you an option to look at, okay, I'm new to this. What should I be looking to do first? What are some of the things that many states are going to require? The other thing that I'm really proud of is the SAN-U or SAN University. It is a member integration course that we just kicked off about 3 weeks ago, our first cohort, and it's going really, really well. Again, it's for those who may be new to the work or may need a refresher, and it is built on an LMS platform. It really digs into, module by module. Each week there's a different module. It's an 8-week course. We are running it strictly like a course as well. So there are assignments, there are tasks, and there are due dates for which you should complete tasks. But that member integration course, again, helps you to dig into some of the principles that are really, really important to SAN and what we do. The international resources that we provide are incredible as well. We've really, really honed in on our border states, Canada and Mexico, just because of, obvious reasons. But yeah, those resources have proven to be very valuable. And I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, Catherine, in just a second, because she was very instrumental in developing these international resources. But I will tell you this, many of us who do this work are teams of one or very small teams. And one of our member institutions said to me, probably the biggest compliment I've received since I've been here is that I treat SAN like another FTE. I'm doing this work by myself, and you all support me in such a way that I can use you as another full-time employee. So, Catherine, take it away on your international resources.
Thank you so much, Jana. And as been said, my name is Catherine Kerensky. I'm the Director of Digital Learning policy and compliance. So I'm just going to highlight just a little bit of the international resources that Jana talked about, and then turn it just a little bit to talk about some membership options. Like I said, I'm really happy to share more about the resources we have. We believe they serve as a good starting point for institutions learning more about compliance-related issues when operating internationally. International compliance can be challenging to understand and just undertake given the range of potential compliance obligations that may be required depending on where an institution is operating or where students are located. This can range from institutional approval, professional licensure, consumer protection, data privacy, and more. We developed a few resources ranging from a short overview of the topic to some of the more in-depth resources that Jana mentioned. One that you'll find on our SAN charts is an International Ministries of Education and Data Privacies. This provides a snapshot of contacts for the Ministries of Education and the data privacy laws in over 170 locations. And again, these are just links to the laws, but we really hope to give institutions a starting point just to finding the information they need. We know that even just finding this information can be challenging. And we also plan to expand this chart to include other potentially applicable national ministries such as taxation or licensure where it's applicable. But turning to some of our more in-depth guides, we have a guide to higher education in regulation in Canada, provides a start to institutional research by offering a thorough review of potentially relevant regulatory information in Canada, both nationally and by province and territory. So this not only highlights some of the applicable laws that might apply, depending on the issue, such as employment, professional licensure, etc. It really also talks a little bit more explanation of what the law is and when it may apply, and where institutions should look for more information. And the same is true with our guide to higher education regulation in Mexico. This is done nationally and by state. We are able to find the state laws of education and different contact information and laws for just a wide range of issues. We were really fortunate to be able to work with a contact at CONAHEC who has a lot of experience in international work and collaboration, and specifically with policy, higher ed policy in Mexico. So we were really fortunate to have his expertise just in navigating the policy in addition to help with translation. So I'm really proud of that work and hope that it'll be helpful for institutions who are seeking to learn more about what it would take to be in compliance and operate when they're located in some of our border countries. And quickly too, just on this, I'll add, so those guides have a lot more information, like I said, kind of explain what might apply and when, have a little bit more analysis, a little more data. But if you just want a quick snapshot of where things are, we also have what we call our quick charts, which you can see on the left for both Canada and Mexico. And these are just the links to the agencies, to some contact information, and to the laws and agencies. So it really just helps if the guide is too much information and you just want to go to the links, those are there as well. And I'm going to move forward quickly just to talk about some of our membership opportunities. So SAN memberships can be held by individual institutions or by group memberships for partnership systems, consortia, or organizations. You can see here on this slide and on our website some of the pricing options. So SAN membership fee is discounted if at least one institution or entity within the SAN individual or group membership has separately joined WCET, which, as Russ said, that WCET is essentially our parent organization. SAN is a division of WCET. And I will mention as well, memberships must designate a single point of contact for the invoice, management of the division of the payment, and memberships, depending on the membership they choose, may also have a coordinator responsible for sharing the information with the other institutions and individuals within the membership. And that coordinators are responsible for sharing the website login with their institution contacts. And I will say that in terms of group memberships, we've found that group memberships have been beneficial to those who have decided to organize by sector. So for example, like maybe the private institutions in a state or the community colleges within a state organizing together have found a lot of benefit in that. But there is the benefit of, or the option of choosing an individual membership or a group membership if that is a consideration for cost. And again, happy to answer any questions about membership opportunities. Lastly, I did just want to highlight the SAN team here. We really pride ourselves on being available and being responsive. So please feel free to reach out to any one of us. You see Cheryl here. She's our senior director. She wasn't able to join us today, but she's very knowledgeable, very happy to respond to people. And Leah really gets everyone started with the information that they need for members. She's our wonderful administrative assistant. Our contact information is here, but that'll be available in the slides. So I'm going to stop sharing here so that I can turn it over to Jared for our next session with Chris.
Thanks so much to Russ and to Jana and Catherine as well. And just a quick table setting for the next kind of significant portion here. Forgive me, just need to catch back up to the slides. But continue putting questions in the chat. I believe you can see as Russ was actually answering a question or two, there should be then in the middle section, if you go to the Q&A, an answered portion, and we're trying to answer some of them live as well. Like I said, we'll also seek to answer questions verbally in the remaining time we have before 11:30. And just to, again, quickly, a table set too, while we heard from the WCET SAN folks, and we'll hear in a second from the Higher Education Licensure Pros, we wanted to both be able to provide this information to you, understanding there's some great depth to this and breadth to this, and not to be able to necessarily think that everybody's going to understand everything from today, but that you can also, again, continue to follow these resources and potentially engage with them directly. So that was the benefit of hopefully this time today, was to learn a bit more about these topics, but also to learn about these organizations as continuing resources. So at this time, excited to turn things over to Chris Mall, who is the co-founder and a principal at the Higher Education Licensure Pros, or HELP. Thanks so much, Chris, for being here.
Thanks so much, Jared. Appreciate you having me today, and happy to share a bit more detail about licensure and compliance. So I'm going to share my screen here. Bear with me one moment. All right, looks like we're ready to roll. Okay, so as Jared mentioned, my name is Chris Mall. I am with Higher Education Licensure Pros. We are a small consulting firm that was founded just over 3 years ago to help support colleges and universities working towards compliance with the current Title IV licensure disclosure requirements. Those have been in place since July 1st of 2020. We've been working with institutions, like I said, the past few years to comply with that. And now we have a new requirement that's really increasing responsibilities for institutions. So I'm going to talk a little bit about that today and expand on what Russ had mentioned during his presentation. So again, going to cover kind of what that is at a high level, these new July 1 requirements going into effect related to professional and occupational licensure. I have some examples of how to apply these new regulations and requirements to programs. Some of them your institution may offer. And then some kind of ideas, how are we advising institutions to start preparing for July 1st? What do you need to be doing today, or maybe even needed to have started yesterday to be on a path to be ready for July 1st? And I do have some more information to share about how we work with institutions and the services and support we can offer as well. So first off, wanted to level set here. I think many of you are familiar with this about regulations, right? But so we have a final regulation that was released in October. This is part of that certification procedures bundle that Russ was talking about. So we have the final regulation. What we don't have is anything in addition to that the department has put out in writing. So we don't have any, dear colleague letters or additional guidance or information on a Department of Education website or anything about implementation or how to really understand some of the new regulation, because it's not clear, right? Like a lot of these, there is some nuance that's missing, right, from the actual regulation language itself, and even from the commentary that was released with the regulations, which if you care to read it, it's quite lengthy. So knock yourself out, or maybe knock yourself to sleep someday if you want to read through all of the commentary released. But in my particular slides, which again will be made available to you afterwards, you're going to see a number of them have red font on the slides. what the red font is signifying is it's information that I have received directly from Vanessa Gomez, who is the Department of Education staff contact for this particular regulation change. And you can see her phone number and email up here on the screen. You should and can contact her yourself to ask questions related to this new regulation and how to implement it. But just wanted to point out the red font again, it's what I've received directly from her through email. So that's not in the regulation language. It's not in the commentary or the preamble that the department released with it, but it's important information. And I do know that she's been pretty consistent, at least from what I'm hearing from others who have also been communicating with her with these answers. So that's why I'm including it in today's presentation. Also just wanted to note, I am an attorney, but this is not legal advice. So please contact your own counsel at your institution before you make these important decisions on how to move forward with implementing. All right, I'm going to keep going. And again, use the Q&A for questions. I'm going to make sure to leave time so that we have questions for time for all of your questions at the end. But this is kind of a high level summary of what's going on with the professional and occupational licensure under these new July 1, 2024 regulations. So you can see here, and Russ had mentioned it on his slide briefly, this new requirement is related to the Program Participation Agreement, PPA certification. And it does two important things. First is an institution has to attest or certify that your program meets all education requirements where your institution is located. That one should be pretty easy, right? If your programs meet the licensure requirements in the state or territory where your institution is located. Second one may be more challenging, right? You have to also certify that your program meets the education requirements for licensure where your prospective students are located at the time of initial enrollment. And then there's this exception that the department's created. Okay, if it doesn't meet, you can still enroll, but they have to provide a written attestation that they're going to seek licensure and employment in a meets state or territory after they graduate. So those are the big things. Again, the biggest challenge is going to be you have to be able to say, yes, our program meets the educational requirements where our prospective students are located, or they attest that they're going to seek a license in order to enroll them. So this is a big change, could impact your institution's ability to enroll students in some of your programs. Really quickly, the rest of the summary. So again, public disclosures and individual direct disclosures have been around since July 1st of 2020. The biggest change here is in public disclosures. So the Department of Education is removing the not determined or no determination made category starting July 1, 2024. So new public disclosures this July, it should be a listing of those states and territories where your institutions determine the program meets or does not meet educational requirements. And I actually have more slides that's going to break down these a little bit further, but I wanted to set us up with that high level. In case I'm running out of time, I'm going to flip through some slides quickly here towards the end. So, okay, definitions, key terms. Like any kind of regulation or law, right? It's really important to understand what are the definitions for the terms being used. First one is around licensure. So licensure is not defined within the regulation itself, but the way that the Department of Education uses it, it really is defined as something, credential, certification, a license, a registration, an endorsement, whatever it is called by that state or territory, it's something issued by a state or territory government that's required in order to practice or be employed in a specific profession or occupation. So it's important to note that this is distinct from a private organization issued credential, often called a certification, could be called other things. Those sometimes may be required by employers or preferred for employment, but if it's not a state or territory issued whatever credential, license, certification, then does not fall under these requirements and regulations. So that's kind of first thing to keep in mind. Second one is around distance education. This term is critical under the new PPA certification requirement, as well as the disclosure requirements. You'll notice the red font here. So reminder, this is information I've received from Vanessa Gomez at the Department of Education. So they're indicating that the May 2023 Dear Colleague letter definition of distance education should be applied in this instance. And you can see that on the screen here. Basically, it means if you have a prospective student that's going to enroll in one or more distance education courses during their first term of enrollment, then you need to consider them as a distance education student, which means you have to be able to certify that the program meets educational requirements where they are located at the time of initial enrollment. So I'll get into more details again on that. But this distance education term, again, critical under the new PPA certification requirement. And then the final key term here I want to focus on is initial enrollment. So initial enrollment is an important point of time, and it's being used for both the new PPA certification requirement as well as disclosures. So initial enrollment, you can see the definition here, which does come from the regulation. So basically, there's some flexibility with individual institutions identifying that specific point in time, which is the initial enrollment, but it does need to be prior to an enrollment agreement being completed or a financial commitment to the institution. So we can, again, get into more details there if people have questions, but these are key terms to keep in mind as I keep digging in a little bit further into the weeds here on these licensure requirements. So program participation agreement, basically the terms and conditions for your institution to participate in Title IV. So that's what this new licensure requirement is linked to. And again, as I said, you have to be able to certify that your programs meet educational requirements where your institution is located and where your students are located. Distance education students is the actual language from the regulation. Again, distance education has a specific definition that department staff has indicated needs to be applied in this circumstance. So you'll see again the red font here, it's that May 2023 Dear Colleague letter definition. Side note, I'm very hopeful that we are going to see some written guidance of some sort from Department of Education at some point soon. I have not heard a specific timeline from staff, although I've inquired a couple times. But I do think some of these things that are just being put out there through emails to specific people that are inquiring, it really needs to be a wholesale guidance document of some sort to clarify some of these things. So hopefully we'll see that soon, and that can help us all be best prepared for July. Okay, another key thing here, in real estate, they say location's everything, right? Well, student location is really everything under this new PPA certification requirement, as well as the disclosure requirement. So every institution needs to have a student location policy in place. And that policy is going to determine where your prospective students are located, right? So again, for this new PPA certification, you have to be able to certify that you meet the education requirements where your prospective student is located at the time of initial enrollment. So there's not a prescription from Department of Ed on what that student location policy needs to be or what your processes need to be around determining student location. But you do have to have a student location policy in place, right? And it's something that should be an official university policy that goes through the same processes of any policy that's created or changed or updated at your institution. And then that student location policy needs to be applied consistently across your institution. So if you don't know if your institution has a student location policy for these purposes, then that's something that you're going to want to get moving on really quickly, because it is a very important consideration under these new requirements. Okay, so I have a couple of points here. This is information that I pulled out from the commentary, or the preamble as it's called, with the final regulations. And then again, you'll see some red font, which is further clarification that I've received from Vanessa Gomez at Department of Education. So first point, and this is really a big one, especially in light of, again, that distance education definition that they're applying. But essentially, the department has said in the commentary, any prospective student who's going to be attending face-to-face, that's the term they use, on-campus program, you can consider them to be located where the campus is. So even though that prospective student may be moving or relocating in order to attend your on-campus face-to-face program, you can still consider them to be located there already for this PPA certification purpose or for disclosures. So this is actually a pretty big deal, right? So if you have a program where you're truly not offering any sort of online or distance education component, in particular, not during that first term of enrollment, then you can treat those students as if they're already located on your campus. Again, that's probably the easiest thing for any institution to say is, yes, we know we meet the educational requirements where our campus is located. So this should help institutions as you're kind of working through all of these new regulations and how to implement them. The other piece here, which is helpful, is this is only about the time of initial enrollment into the licensure program. So when you're having to make that certification that, yes, our program meets the educational requirements, it's that specific point in time of initial enrollment of that prospective student into your licensure program. So what that means is if a student moves to a does not meet location at some point while they're still enrolled, that's okay. The department's explicitly said this in the commentary. That student would not lose Title IV eligibility. The program would not lose Title IV eligibility. The student could remain enrolled in the program. You will need to send them a disclosure, direct disclosure, which I'll get to in a moment, but they can continue on in the program. Okay, I'm going to keep rolling here so we can get through some more and have time for questions. Other piece here is, again, coming from the commentary, this is around that written attestation that I mentioned before. So the department has created kind of this exception or carve out where you can still enroll a student, or a prospective student, I should say, who's located in a does not meet state or territory, as long as they make a written attestation that, well, I'm actually going to seek a license and employment in this specific meets state or territory after I graduate. So that could be where your campus is located, or it could be any other state or territory where you've determined that your program meets the educational requirements. And again, you can see some red font up here on the slide. This is information that I received directly from Ms. Gomez, basically just saying, listen, this has to be not just kind of a checkbox or like gloss over kind of thing. We want to see a written attestation where the student actually has concrete plans to live and work in that meets state or territory after they graduate. And then, of course, you would have to retain the documentation of this and make that available to the Department of Education or related auditors should they ever ask. So, okay, that was PPA certification focus. Again, the new heightened responsibility for all institutions participating in Title IV. I'm just going to touch briefly on the public disclosures and direct disclosures because they do still exist under the new July 1 requirements. And just a little bit of change, but not really that much change in practice, probably. So under public disclosures, again, the department has removed that no determination or not determined category. I know from my experience working with institutions, a lot of you probably have states and territories listed as not determined right now, because that is within compliance for the current regulations that went into effect July 1 of 2020. So you're going to have to figure out what to do with those no determined states and territories. Either make those determinations and put them into a meets or a does not meet, listing, because those are the options now under the new requirements, or potentially leave them off of your disclosures because it's not required, or potentially still close that you haven't determined. So the regulations set a floor, right? Just like any regulations, you can always disclose more, right, than what you have to per the regulation. So there may be some instances where your institution would continue having a listing of states and territories where you have not determined about your program. Now, that's going to depend on the scenarios for your programs, what kind it is, right? Is it a distance education program? Or do you have online or distance education courses available to your campus-based students within that first term of enrollment? And it could also just depend, frankly, on how you're advertising the program. So you'll see, again, some language in red font here on the slide coming from Ms. Gomez, which basically the department is saying, like, look, if an institution is advertising their programs to students in the state, we expect them to know if the program meets or doesn't meet requirements, and they need to be disclosing that. So I think this advertising piece, which is not in the regulation itself, again, something that's coming through this kind of third source of information. I think that's important to note, though. So institutions may need to clearly list meets and does not meet on their public disclosures for a good portion of states and territories, in particular if you're advertising to try to attract prospective students from those states. All right, and then individual direct disclosures, again, we don't have a change here at all from the current regulations, which means we kind of have a wonky mismatch with language here. So if you have a prospective student located and it does not meet or not determined state or territory, you need to send them a written disclosure prior to enrollment in the program. So anytime you have a prospective student there, I think under the new requirements, these students are going to need to receive a written attestation or go through that written attestation process, I should say, in order to be able to actually enroll, right? Because you cannot enroll a student if they are located and it does not meet or have not made a determination state or territory. So it'll be important to really sync up your direct disclosure process with this new written attestation process that you'll have to put into place. And then for current students, you still need to send a written disclosure if they end up being in a does not meet state or territory, either because the student themselves move or something changes with the state or territory's requirements or something changes with your program. And so they're in a does not meet location now. In all of those scenarios, you need to send that disclosure within 14 calendar days of the institution knowing that they're now in a does not meet state or territory. And again, just a reminder, if it's because the student is moving, the department has said they do not lose access to Title IV funds. They can continue being enrolled in that program, even though they're located in a does not meet state or territory. All right, this slide looks like super overwhelming in this view, but when you get the slides from me, you'll be able to click on a link that will take you to a PDF version. This is just kind of a snapshot summary we created that lists under the new July 1 requirements, these different steps that an institution will need to take in order to be in compliance. Oops, I'm sorry, I did not mean to click on that, but there you go. That is what it looks like. I'm going to roll through just a couple of examples here quickly before I talk about our resources, and then we'll be ready to open it up for questions. So similar on this slide, you'll see this flow chart. When you get the slide deck, you can click on it and it'll take you to a PDF version of the flow chart. But we created this to try to help kind of visualize and understand how to apply these new July 1 regulations and requirements to programs at an institution. So I'm just going to walk through a couple here as an example. Let's say that you offer a bachelor's degree in exercise science or something related to that. So the first place to start is this a licensure program? Well, there are certifications that are offered related to exercise science. Maybe it's personal training or something like that. So we're advertising it like it can help someone become that type of occupation and profession. Is it a licensure program? Well, for this, the answer is no, because there's not a state or territory issued or required license or certification, or again, whatever that label may be. So because it's only that private organization type, which again, may be required or even potentially, preferred for employment, it's not covered under the regulations because it's not a state or territory issued credential. So that one's easy. No, great. We don't have to worry about PPA certification or disclosures. All right, let's move on then to a bachelor's in education for elementary education teachers. So is this one a licensure program? Is it designed or advertised to lead to a license? Yes. You do have to have a license issued by a state or territory in order to teach in public schools. And very few programs that I've ever encountered are not specifically designed for this, right? And you have to go through your own state's approval process by your state Board of Education or whatever your governing entity is called in order to get the program approved in the first place to be able to offer it to prepare elementary education teachers. So this one's clearly a yes. Okay, so public disclosures, right? You're going to have that listing of meets or does not meet based on the states and territories where you've made a determination. If this is a program that you're offering through distance education, that list should probably be pretty comprehensive, meaning that you should be covering the vast majority or all of US states and territories. And there are 59 of them specified in the regulation. So if you don't know what those territories are, please ask and I can provide a list of what those are to get you to 59. For direct disclosures to the prospective student, or I should say for the prospective student, first thing to consider, again, is there distance education courses available during that first term of enrollment? And if the answer is no, if they have to come to your campus, there's no online courses as an option, then your student location policy could be drafted in such a way that you're going to treat that prospective student as being located on your campus at the time of initial enrollment. And so if that's the case, where you've got the student location policy in place, you're treating that prospective student as located on your campus already, that means they're going to meet the educational requirements. So they're going to meet your Vermont requirements. Your campus is located in Vermont. The program's approved by Vermont for elementary education teacher preparation. So that's a pretty easy yes. In that case, no direct disclosure is required because, again, you only have to send direct disclosures to the does not meet or not determined states or territories. You could have a student location policy that does not treat the prospective student as located on campus. And if that's the case, then you would need to send a direct disclosure if they're located in a does not meet or a not determined state or territory, right? So again, this flow chart you're going to have to work through for each of the different scenarios for that particular program. But if you have to send that direct disclosure, again, it must be sent prior to enrollment, so prior to financial commitment or enrollment to the institution. And then if you're talking about this scenario where you're sending the direct disclosure prior to enrollment, you will need to have them complete that written attestation process in order to actually enroll them, because that is part of the new PPA certification requirements. All right, let me check the time. Ooh, I am out of time. So here's what I'm going to do. Again, sorry about this, but when you get the slide deck, we have some things to keep in mind for preparing for July 1st. I'm just going to whip through these real quick, and hopefully they'll be helpful to you and those at your institutions as you're working through this. Again, student location policy, that's absolutely critical, something that you should have started yesterday if you don't already have one. And then lots of people at your institution that are important to have included in this work. So make sure that you're connecting with them. And finally, I better say this because otherwise I will neglect the chance to let you know about our resources. So we have something called the Bookmark, which is an online database of education requirements. We've researched in every state and territory, those 59 across the US, what it takes to qualify for a license. And we have over 70 different professions in our database now. You can become a member and get access to the database. You can see the cost for that here. We have different levels. We do work on an enterprise level with state associations or consortiums of institutions. And so if any of this is of interest to you, please reach out. You can find information on our website about the Bookmark and even schedule a time to get a demo there where you can see what it looks like. Ask us about specific license types. We can show you all of that information right in the Bookmark. So I'm going to turn it back over to Jared and stop sharing here. Sorry, I do not have a stop share option. That is very weird. Thank you. Jared must have clicked me off. You're on mute, Jared.
Thank you. We're helping each other today. Thank you, Chris, for that very thoughtful and detailed overview. And again, as folks understood, this wasn't necessarily able to get to every absolute thing that we could get to. But again, these two organizations are here and available. So we're going to try to get through a couple of questions before we're done. Again, keeping an eye on that we finish here at 11:30 Eastern time today. And I know most of these here are for professional licensure directly, but our colleagues Russ and Jana and Catherine may certainly want to chime in as well. So Chris, I'm going to pose the first question. Are the public disclosures required for all licensure programs regardless of modality, or only for distance learning programs?
For all programs need the public disclosures.
The next one I'll ask that I think was a theme of some, how are hybrid or courses with the blend of on-campus and distance education perceived? Are they considered online?
That is a great question that I am not equipped to answer based on information provided by Department of Education up to this point. So again, I think, if you haven't read yourself that May 2023 Dear Colleague letter, it'd be worth reading that to see, but I don't know that we have a clear answer for that based on what's in that Dear Colleague letter or other information that's been made available.
Jared, in the negotiations, I was trying to get them to define distance ed programs so that we would know the answer to this, and I haven't been successful so far. They're going to define distance ed course, but it is something that they need to work on.
Thanks, Russ, as well for that. So Jill asks, does it matter if it's a first term, first year student or a first term transfer? And I guess the differentiation there being, potentially somebody who's transferred is now in their first term, right, at a new institution. So do you see a differentiation there?
I really don't. I mean, I welcome others' thoughts on this, Russ, Catherine, others, but it's because it's really, again, about initial enrollment into that licensure program, right? So whether you have someone who's a first-time college student enrolling, or somebody who's transferring, or even someone from your own institution that starts out as an undeclared major, and then they do declare, and now they're, in a licensure program, that initial enrollment is about initial enrollment into that licensure program. That's what triggers, you have to be able to certify that you meet the educational requirements, where they are located, and you may have to send, these disclosures out to them if they're in a does not meet or not determined situation.
Thank you for that. Another question that I think is, good if you could add to. And I'm going to paraphrase it, but if the student, I guess, were to begin as a purely face-to-face student at an institution in an applicable program, but then proceed, to enroll at a distance, what would that impact? What considerations might you have or advice you can share?
Yeah, so I guess my thoughts would be, again, just looking at it under these new July 1 regulations, it's really connected to the time of initial enrollment into that licensure program. So if it's the same program, right, if we're talking about you have the same program, but students get to choose which modality, but it's all considered the same program. If they're just switching modalities, I don't think that's going to trigger any new responsibility around PPA certification or disclosures. If it's a separate program, then it may trigger the need to do that PPA certification when they're enrolling into that different modality. So again, this is not covered at all in the commentary or in any kind of guidance from the department. As I mentioned, I'm hoping they had mentioned that they are planning to put out some kind of Q&A in the future. So I'm hoping that they drop that sooner rather than later so that people will have time to really digest that as they're starting to prepare and implement these for July. So you should ask that question to Vanessa Gomez, I guess is what I'm saying. See if they'll include that in the Q&A.
Next question from Gwendolyn. Do we have any information on how changes may affect international distance ed students? And I'll point out too, I know that the SAN team had talked a little bit about distance ed as well. International as well. But maybe for Chris first.
So yeah, the licensure requirements only apply to those Title IV eligible programs, right? So I know it's going to get complicated because you could have students that are not Title IV eligible that are in a program that is. I think unfortunately where I've landed with this, and again, welcome Russ and Catherine and Jana's thoughts, is because it's about the program, you're going to have scenarios where you need to maybe treat that international student as if you're like the same way that you're treating all other students in that Title IV program. So you may need to send them those direct disclosures, even though technically, they're not accessing Title IV themselves, but it's because it's about the Title IV programs eligibility and not down to the specific student level as far as categorizing a program, right, or how it works. So I hope that answers the question. If it's about like a US citizen student who's completing the program internationally, then again, this is something I don't know the answer to yet. Like if they have an international address, well, then they're not located in any US state or territory, right? So we don't have guidance from the department on if or how you need to categorize them for purposes of direct disclosures and for the PPA certification.
Catherine, do you want to say anything about the international? And then I've got a perspective, Lindsay.
Yeah, I would just add, and I'd echo what Chris said, but when it comes to internationally located students, you have to consider the laws of where that student is located. So in terms of the structure provided by the department, that may not apply, and with what Chris said, but you would have to investigate what might apply in that given country, and they might have their own, consumer protection or professional licensure requirements that you'd have to consider, and that might include some version of notification or disclosures, or possibly like prohibitions on enrolling in certain programs. So it's just something to consider based on where the student is located internationally.
Yeah, and I'll follow, and that's kind of where I was going, is that you have to consider not just Department of Ed, but the laws where they're at, but also if it's a veteran, if are there VA rules are involved, and of course they're slightly different that you have in there. And then while we're talking about compliance on a lot of these, that there are a few of these where you also want to think about your legal exposure on some of these. And so the question before about, well, you don't have to notify the student who changes modalities, but if the student finds out that you're notifying everybody else and you didn't there, do you have a legal exposure at that point if they find out that they can't sit for the nursing exam in a state?
Thank you for that. I believe this was covered, but maybe, Chris, a good one to address again. Could we still enroll students in a does not meet scenario or a not determined scenario if they are not Title IV recipients?
So again, my understanding is because this is really about the program, the answer would be no, unless, remember, there's this written attestation piece. So if they did want to seek a license in meets state or territory, either where your campus is located or any other meets state or territory you've determined, then you could have them go through that written attestation process and they would still be able to enroll in the program.
I believe you were able to go through this, albeit quickly, but please clarify if you can't, but do you have any examples of student attestation letters for the licensure program taking effect in July 1st, or perhaps recommendations for structure or format?
Yeah, right. So I haven't seen any samples yet from any institutions. I know that we're working with some institutions now to create what that's going to look like for them. We really don't have very many specifics, and certainly not in the regulation itself or the commentary. But again, there's been a little bit trickling out through email from Ms. Gomez at the Department of Education. So I think that's something I can work on and maybe be able to provide some thoughts in the written Q&A. But it's definitely, again, hopefully we're going to get more guidance or something from the Department of Ed So that could be something that needs to be factored in, right? If they come out with something more specific they want to see. But it does need to be in writing, that's very clear. And you do need to be able to reproduce that for the department, should they ever ask for it, or should it come up in an audit. So I think thinking through the practicalities of it, this is going to take work for most institutions, with your IT teams and probably like your admission and enrollment teams, figuring out how you're going to create this process. It's not just going to be able to be like a checkbox or some kind of automated form. It's something that's going to need to be a little more robust than that, and probably even require like an actual conversation, right, with someone before they complete that written attestation and it becomes part of that official enrollment record.
Another good question, what kind of documentation or proof will USAID require from an institution to show a program meets or does not meet another state's licensure requirements? And I don't know if you can answer that directly, but anything you want to say around that.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great question too. And I'm pretty sure this came up during negotiated rulemaking. Definitely, I know it was in written comments that were submitted if it wasn't actually brought up during the negotiations themselves. So the department hasn't indicated any specific kind of proof or evidence. They did respond to some comments that people submitted after negotiated rulemaking, where basically they were indicating like, we would expect that licensing boards and agencies would be making information available. I don't really know what that means, but practically, I know that there are very few state licensing boards that issue any kind of like approval for out of state programs. Like that process just really doesn't exist today. So an institution may be able to get an email from a board that says something about generally, how they accept out of state applicants, but I don't think that there are going to be many opportunities to get a specific, yes, your program meets our educational requirements. So what will be important is that institutions document their own process for how they're researching what is required in each of the states and territories, and then document how those determinations are being made. So you'll need to have your curriculum subject matter experts, which are probably your faculty or program directors, actually sit down and compare your courses and practice from an internship or other clinical experience hours to each of the state and territories requirements in some instances. That's not universally true. So you're not going to need to do that for all license types or for every single US state and territory, but it will be required in a lot of instances that you have that very detailed comparison. So when those comparisons are made, retain that documentation, have everything that you've compiled together, whatever that might be. So that was a long-winded answer, but basically there's not a specific checklist at this point. Anything that you do or people at your institution are doing to come to that meets conclusion, you want to retain all of that documentation somewhere and have it available should you need it.
I think we'll take this final, and again, Chris has very nicely promised to help answer questions in writing as well, and that again is going to be in addition to this recording being shared out and the slides that folks have put together, especially from these two wonderful organizations. So I would say last one, and again, Chris, I think you put a point on this earlier. But if institutions clearly state on their website that a state certification only meets certification in the current state, do they still need to send a disclosure and attestation?
Okay, so I think I'm understanding the question. Like, let's say it's a teacher licensure certification program, and you're saying our program is designed to meet Connecticut's requirements. We only meet Connecticut's requirements. If you're not enrolling or trying to enroll students from other states, then you would not be sending anyone disclosures, right, for those other states. So in other words, if all of your prospective students per your student location policy are located in Connecticut and Connecticut is a meets, then you would not be sending direct disclosures. For the public disclosures, again, I'm just going to kind of caution here. It seems like the department is concerned with advertising also, and that's really fuzzy. What exactly does that mean in our internet-based world where things are popping up on people's social media feeds, and you've got all these online ads and things going out. But nonetheless, so if you're actively, trying to recruit prospective students that are located in other states and territories, you may still need to have that does not meet listing of other states. So not a clear answer, but just a caution. I don't think that you can make the assumption that just because you have that kind of disclaimer that we only meet Connecticut's, that's what we're designed for. I don't know that that's going to be enough.
So we've come to essentially the last minute here. Again, what an incredible and thorough overview. And again, understanding that there's incredible depth and breadth to these topics that, will need additional clarification that we certainly encourage folks to follow up with, and seek resources and support for. Again, primarily, we here at the New England Board of Higher Education wanted to provide some overview, as our folks have done today, as well as resources to continue to monitor, keep up, and know that there's folks out there like SAN, the WCET as well, and help that can assist and support you as you move forward. So certainly look out for that. The links on here, again, and the rest of the presentation materials and Q&A will be shared with you, as will the recording, likely into next week or soon thereafter, as soon as we can get it. Thanks so much to Russ, to Janet, Catherine, and Chris for being here today. Again, I'm Jared Abdurkin with the New England Board of Education. Thank you. Have a great weekend, and we hope to see you at future events. Take care.